Have you ever been made to feel worthless by someone you once loved? Picture this. A woman, stripped of her lavish life after a bitter divorce, stands with nothing but the clothes on her back. Her ex-husband, dripping with arrogance and new money, laughs in her face, mocking her empty hands and shattered future. He thinks he's won. He thinks she's broken. But what he doesn't know is that the knowledge she holds in her mind is more valuable than his entire fortune. In a few short days, those empty hands will sign a contract that makes her the bride of a reclusive billionaire and shatters his world forever. This is the story of how she did it. The clinking of silverware against porcelain was a sound Amelia once found comforting, the score to a life of quiet luxury. Now it was a grating symphony of everything she had lost. She sat opposite David at a small, sun-drenched table in La Perle, a restaurant he had chosen, of course. It was all polished chrome and starched white linen, a place designed to make people feel either important or profoundly insignificant. Amelia, in her simple navy dress, one of the few things she'd deemed truly hers, felt a sinking sense of the latter. 2 years. It had been 2 years since the ink dried on the divorce papers, a sterile, brutal document that had cleaved her life in two. He had kept the sprawling Georgian house in Richmond, the art collection they'd curated together, or rather, the one he'd paid for and she'd researched, and the network of glittering, shallow friends. She had walked away with a modest settlement, her dignity in tatters, and a silence that screamed louder than any of their arguments ever had. "You look well, Amelia," David began, the words smooth and practiced, yet they carried a familiar, condescending edge. He swirled the ruby-red wine in his glass, a vintage that cost more than her monthly rent. He wore a tailored Tom Ford suit, a steel Patek Philippe on his wrist, subtle, powerful statements of his continued ascent. He was a man who collected beautiful, expensive things, and for 10 years she had been the prize jewel in his collection. "I'm managing, David," she replied, her voice quieter than she'd intended. She kept her hands clasped in her lap, willing them not to tremble. She had agreed to this meeting, this let's-clear-the-air lunch, against her better judgment, lured by a foolish, lingering hope for a sliver of closure. Perhaps even an apology. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Managing? Come on, darling, I hear things. Living in that little shoebox in Clapham, working for that dusty old bookshop. It's a bit of a downgrade, isn't it, from this?" He gestured vaguely at the opulent room, at the life they once shared. The barb landed, sharp and precise. During their marriage, her passion for antiques, for the intricate histories hidden within old books and forgotten artifacts, had been dismissed as a cute hobby. He had encouraged it only when it served him, when her knowledge could identify a worthy acquisition for his portfolio. He never saw the scholarship, the hours of meticulous study, the genuine love she had for the craft. "It's honest work," she said, the cliché tasting like ash in her mouth. Of course, he placated, taking a sip of his wine. "I'm just concerned. I saw you last week near Sotheby's. You were just staring at the window display. For a moment, I thought you were going to press your nose against the glass like some Dickensian orphan." He was baiting her, and she knew it. He wanted a reaction. Tears, anger, anything to confirm his narrative, that she was lost without him, a ship unmoored and drifting toward oblivion. "I was just looking," she said, her gaze dropping to the pristine white tablecloth. The waiter arrived with their food. David's was a glistening steak, blood rare. Hers was a simple sea base she wouldn't be able to eat. He cut into his steak with surgical precision. "You know, Chloe and I are closing on the house in the Cotswolds next month," he said casually, naming the 25-year-old model he'd left her for. "A proper estate, stables, a guest lodge. Chloe wants to learn polo, can you imagine?" Amelia imagined it all too clearly. She imagined the hollow-eyed parties, the performative happiness, the same suffocating emptiness she had lived in, just with a younger, blonder hostess. "I'm happy for you," she lied, the words feeling foreign and brittle. David finally put his fork down, his eyes, cold and grey like a winter sky, locking onto hers. The feigned friendliness evaporated, revealing the raw, cruel core of the man she had once loved, or thought she had. "Listen, the real reason I asked you here. My financial advisor was looking over some old assets. That ridiculous collection of old clocks and watches you kept in the study. He asked what they were worth." He leaned forward, a conspiratorial smirk playing on his lips. I told him the truth. Absolutely nothing, just sentimental junk. Her breath caught in her chest. That collection was her soul. Each piece was a story she had uncovered. A French Regency mantel clock that had survived the revolution. An English pocket watch whose owner had gone down with the Titanic. They weren't just objects, they were remnants of lives lived, testaments to time itself. He had always called them her ticking dust collectors. "You threw them out?" The question was a whisper of disbelief. "Donated them to some charity shop in Chelsea," he said with a wave of his hand. "Good for the taxes, you know. I just wanted to let you know, so you didn't go trying to claim them as some forgotten marital asset." He paused, letting the cruelty sink in. "It's time to face reality, Amelia. You walked away from this marriage with nothing of real value." He looked down at her hands, resting on the table now, pale and trembling slightly. They weren't adorned with the Cartier diamonds he had once gifted her. They wore no rings, no bracelets. They were empty. And then he laughed. It wasn't a loud, boisterous laugh. It was worse. It was a soft, dismissive chuckle, filled with the chilling finality of his judgment. It was the sound of a man convinced of his absolute victory, the sound of her entire life being weighed, measured, and discarded as worthless. "Empty-handed," he said, the words a final, damning verdict. "You really did leave with nothing at all." In that moment, something inside Amelia shifted. The hurt, the humiliation, the grief that had clung to her like a shroud for 2 years began to recede, replaced by a cold, quiet calm. The fog of her sorrow started to burn away, revealing a core of hardened steel she had forgotten she possessed. He was wrong. He saw nothing because he had never bothered to look. He saw empty hands, but he couldn't see the lifetime of knowledge held behind her eyes, the expertise honed in quiet libraries and dusty auction backrooms. He couldn't see the one thing he could never take from her, her mind. She finally met his gaze, the trembling in her hands ceasing. She didn't say a word. She simply stood up, placed her napkin neatly on the table beside her uneaten fish, and walked out of the restaurant, leaving David alone with his victory, the echo of his laughter following her into the indifferent London streets. The journey back to Clapham was a blur of red buses and grey pavements. The rhythmic jostle of the tube, usually a source of anonymous comfort, felt jarring, each lurch a physical echo of the turmoil inside her. Amelia's flat was on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian townhouse, a space she'd tried to make her own with stacks of books, a threadbare but beloved Persian rug, and the faint, comforting scent of old paper and beeswax. But today, as she turned the key in the lock, the modest rooms felt less like a sanctuary and more like the cage David had described. A shoebox. She dropped her keys on the small hallway table, the clatter unnervingly loud in the silence. For a moment, she just stood there, her back against the door, eyes closed. His laughter ricocheted in her mind, a cruel, endless loop. Empty-handed, absolutely nothing. The betrayal wasn't just in his infidelity or the cold, clinical way he had ended their marriage. The deepest wound was his utter, contemptuous dismissal of her very essence. He had seen her passion as a character flaw, her intellect as a quaint parlour trick. He had systematically dismantled her confidence until she began to believe his valuation of her was the correct one. Walking into the living room, her eyes fell upon the source of her current meagre income and her only remaining solace, her work table. It was an old, scarred oak desk pushed against the wall, meticulously organized despite its cluttered appearance. On it lay the delicate viscera of time itself. Tiny brass gears, gleaming cogs, and hairsprings finer than a spider's silk were laid out on a velvet cloth. A set of watchmaker's loops, precision screwdrivers, and tiny vials of oil were arranged like a surgeon's tools. In the center, propped on a stand, was the movement of a mid-19th century carriage clock she was carefully restoring for a client. This was her real world, a world of patience, precision, and history. A world where value wasn't determined by a price tag but by craftsmanship, ingenuity, and the stories embedded in the metal. While David was chasing market trends and fleeting status symbols, she was tracing the fingerprints of artisans long dead, understanding the genius in a perfectly executed escapement, the artistry in a hand-engraved dial. He had thrown her collection away. The thought was a fresh stab of pain. She sank into the worn armchair opposite her desk, wrapping her arms around herself. The French Regency clock, with its subtle verdigris and silent pendulum, a piece she had found for a pittance at a market in Provence and lovingly restored. The marine chronometer from a decommissioned naval vessel, its gimbals still perfectly balanced. Each piece a friend, a project, a piece of her. He hadn't just donated them. He had erased a part of her history, of her identity. She thought of the power imbalance that had defined their marriage. He held the money, the social standing, the booming voice that silenced hers in every room. She had deferred, smoothed things over, made herself smaller to fit into the gilded box he'd built for her. She had convinced herself it was a partnership, but it had been a hostile takeover of her soul, conducted so slowly and politely she hadn't noticed until she was bankrupt. His words about seeing her at Sotheby's came back to her. He'd seen an orphan, a pathetic onlooker. He hadn't seen the truth. She hadn't been staring at the glittering diamonds or the Picassos in the window. Her focus had been on a small, barely noticed item in the corner of the display, a Patek Philippe Calatrava, an early reference from the 1930s. She wasn't looking with longing. She was looking with professional critique. She had noticed a microscopic imperfection on the enamel dial, a slight discoloration that suggested water damage at some point in its history, a detail that would affect its auction price by at least 30%. He saw a pauper at the palace gates. She was a master appraiser, doing her work for free, for the sheer love of it. A slow-burning anger began to replace the cold ache of despair. It was a foreign feeling, an ember she had suppressed for so long she'd forgotten its heat. He had laughed at her empty hands, but her hands weren't empty. They could dismantle and reassemble a Breguet tourbillon movement with a surgeon's grace. They could feel the subtle difference in weight between authentic and forged gold. They could hold a book and absorb its knowledge. Her gaze shifted from the clock on her table to the bookshelves that lined the entire length of the living room wall. They were crammed with auction catalogues, reference books on horology, biographies of master watchmakers, and treatises on antique furniture. This was her arsenal. This was her fortune. It was a wealth David could never comprehend, let alone possess. Driven by this new, unfamiliar fire, she stood up and walked back to her work table. She picked up a watchmaker's loop, the cool metal a familiar comfort in her palm, and fitted it to her eye. Peering through the magnified lens, the intricate world of the carriage clock's movement came into sharp focus. The chaos of tiny parts resolved into a perfect, logical system, a miniature universe ticking in harmony. She picked up a pair of brass tweezers and, with a hand that was now perfectly steady, adjusted a pallet jewel by a fraction of a millimeter. It was a delicate, nerve-wracking operation, but her mind was clear, her focus absolute. In this world, she was not the discarded wife. She was not empty-handed. She was a master, a custodian of history, a restorer of broken things. As she worked, the rhythm of the ticking clock on her desk seemed to change. It was no longer just a measure of passing seconds. It was a countdown, a promise, the ticking of a different kind of clock, one that was measuring not what she had lost, but what she was about to build. David had started a war without realizing his opponent was armed. He thought the battle was over. For Amelia, it had just begun. 3 days after the disastrous lunch with David, the anger had cooled, solidifying into a quiet, resolute purpose. The initial shock of losing her collection had been replaced by a pragmatic, almost cold assessment of her situation. Grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. What she needed was a plan. Her small restoration business brought in enough to cover her rent and bills, but it was a hand-to-mouth existence. To achieve true independence, to build a fortress so high David's shadow could never touch her again, she needed capital. On a damp Thursday morning, Amelia found herself drawn to a place that felt more like home than her own flat. Grayson's auction house. It wasn't one of the grand, intimidating establishments like Christie's or Sotheby's. Grayson's was a smaller, humbler affair, tucked away on a cobbled side street in Islington. It specialized in estate clearances and miscellaneous antiques, a place where priceless treasures could be hidden amongst mountains of forgotten junk, visible only to those who knew what they were looking for. The air inside was thick with the scent of aged wood, decaying paper, and furniture polish, a perfume Amelia found deeply reassuring. She was there for the pre-auction viewing, a chance to inspect the lots before they went under the hammer that afternoon. She moved through the cluttered aisles with a practiced eye, her mind a swift, silent calculator. She dismissed a Georgian sideboard with poorly repaired veneer, noted the clumsy modern reproductions of Victorian silverware, and mentally appraised a set of chipped porcelain that someone had optimistically labelled as Meissen. Most of the attendees were dealers, men and women with sharp eyes and a cynical slouch, looking for a quick flip. They moved with a predatory swiftness, their inspections cursory. Amelia's process was different. It was slower, more intimate. She was a historian, a detective. She looked for the subtle clues others missed, the maker's mark hidden on the underside of a drawer, the specific dovetail joint that dated a piece to a particular decade, the almost invisible scribe lines of a master craftsman. She was about to leave feeling a familiar pang of disappointment when she saw it. Tucked away in a corner, part of a lot described simply as Lot 214 Assorted Household Effects, was a clock. It was languishing at the bottom of a cardboard box, peeking out from under a tangle of tarnished silver-plated cutlery and a moth-eaten tapestry. To a casual observer, it was utterly unremarkable. A small wooden mantel clock, its mahogany case darkened with decades of grime, the brass bezel around its face tarnished to a dull, muddy brown. The glass was hazed over, obscuring the dial within. The dealers had ignored it. It was exactly the kind of piece David would have called sentimental junk. Amelia felt a faint tremor of excitement, a hunter's instinct she had long suppressed. She knelt, carefully lifting the clock from the box. It was heavier than it looked, a good sign. The weight suggested a substantial, well-made movement, not the cheap, flimsy mechanisms of later eras. She ran her fingers over the grimy wooden case. The mahogany was solid, not a veneer. She turned it over, her heart quickening. On the back, almost hidden by dirt, was a small, hinged door. Using her fingernail, she gently pried it open. Inside, the brass movement was grimy but intact. Her eyes scanned the backplate, searching for a signature, a maker's mark, and then she saw it. It wasn't an engraving. It was a set of impossibly small, faint scratches in a corner of the brass plate, a mark she would never have found if she hadn't known to look for it. It was a sequence of 3 symbols, a star, a crescent moon, and a sun. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She felt a dizzying rush, as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. She recognized the mark. She had seen it only once before, in a rare, privately published monograph she'd spent months tracking down. It was the secret signature of Antoine Dubois, a reclusive, genius horologist from the late 18th century. Dubois was a legend, a ghost in the world of clockmaking. He was a contemporary of the great Breguet, but unlike his famous rival, he never signed his work conventionally. He was a notorious eccentric who created only a handful of pieces for a few select aristocratic patrons, each one a masterpiece of mechanical innovation. His work was considered lost, the stuff of myth. No signed Dubois clock had ever come to public auction. Her hands trembling slightly, she turned her attention back to the clock's face. Using the silk lining of her jacket, she carefully polished a section of the clouded glass. As the haze cleared, her suspicion turned to certainty. The dial was not paper or enamel. It was porcelain with delicate hand-painted Roman numerals, but it was the hands that confirmed it. They were impossibly fine, crafted from heat-blued steel, and at their center was not one central pivot, but two. The clock had 2 second hands. It was a diablotine or little devil, a notoriously complex and rare complication. 1 second hand ticked clockwise in the conventional way, while the other moved counterclockwise, meeting at the top and bottom of the dial. It was a wildly difficult mechanism to create, a breathtaking and whimsical display of pure mechanical artistry. It was Dubois' signature invention, a feature described in the monograph but never seen in a surviving piece. This wasn't just a dirty old clock. This was it. The impossible find. A lost masterpiece. Its true value was astronomical, almost incalculable. To the art world, it would be like finding a previously unknown Vermeer. She carefully placed the clock back in the box, arranging the tarnished cutlery over it, hiding it from view. Her mind was racing, her heart pounding against her ribs. She felt a surge of adrenaline so potent it made her feel lightheaded. She looked around the room. No one was watching, no one had seen. To them, it was just junk in a box. She had to have it. She checked her bank account on her phone. After paying her rent, she had just over £2,000 to her name. It was everything she had. Lot 214 was an assorted lot, likely to start low, maybe £50. But if just one other person in the room saw even a fraction of its potential, she could be outbid in seconds. This was the ultimate gamble. But as she stood up, a sense of calm settled over her. This wasn't about the money, not really. It was about validation. David had thrown away her collection, calling it worthless. And now, fate, or the god of forgotten things, had presented her with the single most valuable object she had ever touched. He had laughed at her empty hands, but in a few hours those hands might hold a king's ransom. The auction began at 2 o'clock sharp. The room, which had been a space of quiet contemplation during the viewing, was now buzzing with a low, anxious energy. Amelia found a seat near the back, a strategic position that allowed her to observe the room without drawing attention to herself. She held her bidding paddle, number 87, so tightly her knuckles were white. Her stomach was a knot of tightly coiled nerves. The auctioneer, a portly man named Mr. Harrison, with a booming voice and a theatrical flair, moved through the early lots with practiced efficiency. Victorian furniture, silver-plated tea sets, landscape paintings of dubious origin. They came and went, sold for predictable prices to the usual crowd of dealers. Amelia feigned a casual disinterest, her gaze drifting around the room, but her entire being was focused on one thing, Lot 214. She scanned the faces of the other bidders, trying to read their intentions. There was a man in a tweed jacket who specialized in military memorabilia, a woman who bought only porcelain, a pair of young, trendy dealers who were snapping up mid-century furniture. None of them had paid the slightest attention to the box of household effects. Her hope began to rise. Maybe, just maybe, no one else knew. "And now," Mr. Harrison boomed, "we come to lot 214, a mixed lot of assorted household effects. A bit of a rummage box, this one. We'll start the bidding at a modest £20. Do I have 20? A hand went up near the front. A woman who ran a junk shop in Brighton. 20 I have, thank you, madam. Do I have 30? Amelia held her breath. This was the moment. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the auctioneer. £30 at the back. Thank you, number 87. Do I have 40? The Brighton dealer bid 40. Amelia bid 50. The dealer frowned, glancing back at Amelia with a flicker of annoyance. She likely wanted the silver-plated cutlery for scrap value. She bid 60. Amelia's heart pounded. She raised her paddle. 100, she said, her voice clear and firm, hoping the jump in bidding would signal a determination she didn't feel and scare off the competition. The dealer scoffed and shook her head, turning away. A wave of relief washed over Amelia, but it was short-lived. 120, a quiet voice said. The voice came from the far side of the room. Amelia couldn't see the speaker clearly, only the back of a man sitting perfectly still in the shadows of a corner. He hadn't bid on anything else all afternoon. He hadn't so much as twitched. He didn't raise a paddle. He had simply spoken the bid, a confident, low murmur that cut through the noise of the room. Mr. Harrison, surprised, peered into the corner. £120 from the gentleman in the corner. Do I have 150, number 87? Amelia's blood ran cold. Who was he? What did he see? Had he noticed the clock? Her mind raced. She had to assume he had. She nodded. 150. 200, the voice from the corner replied instantly, without hesitation. A nervous murmur rippled through the room. The other dealers were now watching, sensing a fight. The price was already far beyond the value of some old cutlery and a dirty clock. Something else was at play. 250, Amelia counted, her palms slick with sweat. This was a significant portion of her savings. 300, came the immediate reply. Amelia's carefully constructed composure began to crack. This man wasn't bidding like a dealer. Dealers were cautious. They had margins to protect. This man was bidding with an unnerving, absolute certainty. It felt less like a competition and more like an inevitability. 350, she said, the words catching in her throat. 500. The jump was designed to intimidate, to signal limitless resources. Amelia felt a surge of panic. She had to go all in. It was a reckless, foolish move, but the thought of letting that clock slip through her fingers was unbearable. 1,000, she declared. A collective gasp went through the room. Mr. Harrison's eyebrows shot up. The man in the corner was silent for a moment. Amelia dared to hope. Had she finally pushed him past his limit? She could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on her, a woman in a simple dress bidding £1,000 on a box of junk. The auctioneer's gaze turned to the corner. I have £1,000. Any advance on 1,000? The room was silent. The man didn't move. Going once? Mr. Harrison began. Amelia held her breath. Going twice? The man in the corner gave the slightest, most subtle shake of his head. Sold. Mr. Harrison's gavel cracked down, the sound like a gunshot in the silent room. To paddle number 87 for £1,000. The tension broke. A wave of dizziness washed over Amelia, and she sank back into her chair, her body trembling with adrenaline and relief. She had done it. It had cost her half of everything she had, but she had done it. As the auction moved on to the next lot, the man from the corner stood up. Amelia finally got a clear look at him as he walked towards the exit. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a shock of silver hair and an impeccably tailored grey suit. He moved with an understated, graceful economy of movement, but it was his face that struck her. It was sharp and intelligent, with watchful, piercing blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He wasn't a dealer. He radiated an aura of immense, quiet power. As he passed her row, his gaze met hers for a fleeting second. There was no anger or disappointment in his eyes. There was something else, a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even respect. Then he was gone. Amelia spent the next hour in a daze, waiting for the auction to conclude. When it finally did, she went to the payment desk, her hands still shaking as she entered her PIN. After settling her bill, a porter helped her carry the heavy box out to the street. She refused the offer of a taxi, wanting to hold her prize, to protect it. She carried the box through the crowded London streets, her mind replaying the auction, the quiet voice of the man in the corner. Who was he? Why had he bid, only to stop so suddenly? It didn't make sense. It was as if he wasn't trying to win, but to test her, to see how far she would go. The thought was unsettling, an unsolved mystery at the edge of her victory. But as she finally reached her flat and laid the box on her work table, the unease was eclipsed by a profound sense of triumph. She had faced down a powerful, unknown opponent and won. She had trusted her knowledge, bet on herself, and emerged victorious. She carefully lifted the clock from its nest of tarnished silver. It was hers. The lost masterpiece of Antoine Dubois belonged to her. For the next 2 days, Amelia was immersed in a world of her own making. The Dubois clock sat on her work table, its silent presence filling her small flat with a significance that dwarfed everything else. The outside world, the rumble of traffic, the incessant demands of email, even the memory of David's sneering face faded into a muted background hum. Her entire focus was on the object before her. She worked with the patience of a monk and the precision of a surgeon. The first day was dedicated entirely to the case. Using a special concoction of solvents and oils she mixed herself, she began the painstaking process of cleaning away nearly 2 centuries of accumulated grime. With each gentle wipe of a soft cotton cloth, the true nature of the mahogany was revealed, a deep, rich flame grain that seemed to glow with an inner light. She discovered a subtle, almost invisible marquetry inlay of satinwood along the base, a detail of exquisite craftsmanship. On the second day, she turned her attention to the movement. After carefully removing it from the case, she began the delicate, nerve-wracking process of disassembly. Each gear, each pivot, each screw was removed, documented, and cleaned. As she worked, her admiration for Antoine Dubois grew into a profound, almost spiritual reverence. The man had been more than a clockmaker. He had been an artist, a physicist, a philosopher of mechanics. The design of the Diablotine escapement was unlike anything she had ever seen, a marvel of ingenuity and elegance. It was a solution to a problem no one else had even thought to pose. She was so absorbed in her work late on Saturday afternoon that she didn't hear the knock at first. It was only when it came again, louder and more insistent this time, that it pierced her concentration. Annoyed at the interruption, she wiped her hands on a cloth and went to the door, expecting a package delivery or a neighbor. When she opened it, she froze. Standing in the cramped, poorly lit hallway of her building was the man from the auction, the man from the corner. Up close, he was even more imposing. He was tall and slender, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. His grey suit was clearly bespoke, fitting his frame with an effortless perfection. His piercing blue eyes held the same unnerving intelligence she remembered. "Miss Amelia Hayes?" he asked. His voice was the same one from the auction, quiet, cultured, and resonant with an authority that needed no volume to assert itself. "Yes?" Amelia managed, her heart beginning to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. How did he know her name? How did he find her? "My name is Alistair Finch," he said, extending a hand. "May I have a moment of your time?" Amelia stared at his hand, then at his face. The name echoed in her mind. Alistair Finch. It wasn't a name you forgot if you moved in the world of high-end art and antiques. He was a legendary figure, a phantom, an industrialist who had inherited an immense fortune and then multiplied it tenfold. He had retired decades ago to become one of the world's most formidable and reclusive collectors. He was known to be ruthless in his acquisitions, operating through a network of proxies and agents, his name never appearing on any official paperwork. He was a ghost, a whisper, a name spoken with awe and fear in the backrooms of auction houses. And he was standing on her doorstep. She shook his hand automatically. His grip was firm and dry. "How did you find me?" A faint smile touched his lips. "It wasn't difficult. You paid with a debit card registered to this address. I have people who are very good at finding things. And people." He gestured past her into the flat. "I believe you have something of mine." The words, though spoken softly, landed like a threat. Amelia's mind raced. Was he here to challenge the sale, to intimidate her into selling? She felt a protective surge for the clock, for her discovery. She stood her ground, blocking the doorway. "I bought it at a public auction, Mr. Finch. It's mine. I have the receipt." "Oh, I have no doubt of that," he said, his eyes twinkling with something that looked like amusement. "I was there, remember? I must say your final bid was formidable. You displayed a passion for that particular lot that I found intriguing." He paused. "I'm not here to take it from you, Miss Hayes. I'm here to see it." His tone was disarming, his demeanor unexpectedly polite. Against her better judgment, her curiosity outweighed her fear. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside, allowing him into her flat. He stepped inside, his large frame seeming to shrink the small room. He moved with a quiet grace, his eyes taking in everything at once. He glanced at the overflowing bookshelves, the restoration tools on her desk, and finally his gaze settled on the mantelpiece, where she had placed the newly polished mahogany case, and on her work table, where the magnificent gleaming brass movement of the Dubois clock was laid out in its constituent parts. He approached the work table, not with the arrogance of a billionaire, but with the reverence of a true connoisseur. He bent over slightly, his eyes scanning the disassembled mechanism. He didn't touch anything. "Extraordinary," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "The dual-axis tourbillon, the counter-rotating second hands. It's exactly as the journals described. I had started to believe it was a myth." Amelia watched him, stunned into silence. He knew exactly what it was. He finally turned to face her, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "You know what you have here, don't you, Miss Hayes?" She lifted her chin. "It's the last known work of Antoine Dubois." He nodded slowly, a look of profound respect on his face. "Indeed, the Dubois Diablotine. He made it for the Marquis de Lafayette as a gift for George Washington, but the ship carrying it to America sank in a storm off the coast of Ireland in 1789. It was believed to be lost forever." Amelia's jaw dropped. She knew it was a Dubois, but she had no idea of its specific history, its incredible provenance. It wasn't just a masterpiece, it was a significant historical artifact. "How do you know that?" she asked. "Because," Alistair Finch said, his voice dropping slightly, "my family has been searching for it for over 100 years. Antoine Dubois was a distant ancestor of mine. His journals, his designs, they have been passed down through my family for generations, completing his collection, recovering his lost works. It has been my life's work. This clock is the final piece, the crown jewel." The room fell silent, the only sound the faint ticking of the carriage clock she had been restoring. The power dynamic in the room had shifted entirely. This wasn't just a rich man trying to buy an object. This was personal. This was his family's legacy. "At the auction," Amelia said, finally understanding, "you weren't trying to outbid me. You drove the price up." "I was testing you," he admitted. "My agent informed me that someone was showing an unusual interest in the lot during the viewing. When I saw it was you, I was curious. I know of your reputation, Miss Hayes, a quiet, brilliant restorer with an academic's eye. I wanted to see if you knew what it was. I wanted to see how much it was worth to you." He took a step closer. "You were willing to risk almost everything you had for it. That tells me you understand its true value, which is not about money. And that is why I am here. I don't want to just buy this clock from you, Miss Hayes. That would be too simple. I want to hire you to restore it. And then I want to make you a much more significant offer." Alistair Finch's estate in the Berkshire countryside was not so much a house as it was a private kingdom, hidden from the world by acres of ancient woodland and miles of grey stone walls. Amelia's taxi ride from the station felt like a journey back in time, culminating in the crunch of gravel as they pulled up before a severe, elegant Jacobean mansion that seemed to have grown organically from the misty English landscape. Alistair himself was waiting for her at the door, dressed not in a suit, but in comfortable cashmere and tweed, looking every bit the country squire. He led her inside, not into a grand, ostentatious hall, but into a series of warm, inviting rooms, filled with books, art, and the scent of wood smoke and old leather. The house was a museum, but it was also a home. He had arranged for the Dubois clock to be transported with the care and security usually reserved for a head of state. It now rested on a specially prepared workbench in a room that took Amelia's breath away. It was a vast two-story library, but instead of just books, the shelves were filled with the most extraordinary collection of horological masterpieces she had ever seen. It was a complete history of timekeeping, from early Gothic iron clocks to the works of Harrison, Mudge, and Breguet. And right in the center was a space, an empty pedestal, clearly waiting for the diablotin. "This is my life's work," Alistair said, his voice soft with a pride that was deep and personal, not boastful. Not the companies or the stocks. This, the preservation of genius. For the next week, Amelia lived and worked in a surreal, dreamlike state. Alistair gave her a suite of rooms overlooking the gardens and left her to her work, but he would join her for meals, and in the evenings he would find her in the library. Their conversations started with the clock. She would explain the intricacies of her restoration process, the challenges of sourcing authentic 18th century materials, the sheer wonder of Dubois' mechanical mind. He, in turn, would listen with an intensity and understanding that she had never experienced before. He saw her not as a hobbyist, but as a peer, an expert in her field. He began to share his own stories. He spoke of his father and grandfather, men obsessed with the legend of their ancestor Dubois. He showed her the journals, bound in cracking leather, filled with Dubois' spidery script and intricate, impossible drawings. He explained that collecting wasn't about possession for him. It was about connection, about piecing together a scattered legacy, about giving a voice back to a genius the world had forgotten. Amelia found herself opening up in return. She spoke of her childhood, of a lonely girl who found solace in the quiet, logical world of her grandfather's watch repair shop. She spoke of her passion for the hidden stories of objects, the way a simple pocket watch could tell a tale of love, loss, and adventure. For the first time in over a decade, she felt truly seen. Alistair wasn't interested in her appearance, her social graces, or her connections. He was captivated by her mind, by the depth of her knowledge and the passion in her soul. Her confidence, so long dormant, began to blossom. The timid, deferential woman who had sat opposite David in that restaurant was fading away, replaced by someone more assured, more articulate. She argued with Alistair about the correct method for restoring the porcelain dial, her points backed by meticulous research, and he would concede with a respectful smile. She would walk the misty grounds of his estate in the mornings, feeling a sense of peace and belonging she had never known, not even in the early, hopeful days of her marriage. The power imbalance she had always known was absent here. Yes, Alistair was a billionaire, a man who could buy and sell entire countries. But in the world of the library, in the universe of horology, they were equals. Their relationship was built not on wealth or status, but on a shared, profound respect for their craft. One evening, after a long day spent on the final delicate assembly of the Diablotin movement, she found him in a smaller, more intimate study she hadn't seen before. The walls were covered not with clocks, but with antique maps. "My other passion," he explained, gesturing to the vellum and paper, "cartography, the art of defining one's world." He stood before a vast, detailed map of the world from the 17th century. "I have spent my life charting courses, acquiring assets, finding the missing pieces of my collection, of my family's history." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. "But my own map, Amelia, it has felt incomplete for a very long time. There has been a vast, uncharted territory in the center of it." He took a step closer to her. The air in the room grew thick with an unspoken tension, a warmth that had nothing to do with the crackling fire in the hearth. This was no longer a conversation between a collector and a restorer. "Watching you work," he continued, his voice low, "hearing you speak, seeing the way you breathe life back into these beautiful forgotten things, you have shown me what was missing. It's not an object. It's a connection, a shared understanding." He gently took her hands in his. She didn't pull away. Her hands, which David had mocked as empty, felt perfectly powerfully alive in his grasp. "You are a remarkable woman, Amelia Hayes," he said. "You have a strength and a brilliance that you have kept hidden from the world, or perhaps the world was simply too blind to see it. I see it, and I find it breathtaking." In that moment, Amelia understood that the offer he had mentioned on her doorstep had nothing to do with a job or a financial reward. It was something far more significant. The restoration of the clock was finished. The restoration of her own life, her own sense of self, was nearing its own magnificent completion. She had spent years living in the shadow of a man who saw her as nothing, and now she was standing in the light of a man who saw her as everything. The world outside the stone walls of the estate, the world that held David and his cruel laughter, felt 1,000,000 miles away, a faint, insignificant echo from a life that no longer belonged to her. Amelia was putting the final touches on the Dubois clock, her hands moving with a newfound confidence and grace. The Diablotine was whole again, its mahogany case gleaming, its twin second hands sweeping in their mesmerizing, contrary dance across the pristine porcelain dial. It was more than a restoration, it was a resurrection, and in many ways she felt so was she. She and Alistair had fallen into a comfortable, unspoken rhythm. Their relationship was a quiet, slow-burning fire, built on shared passions and late-night conversations. It was a partnership of minds that was slowly, inevitably, becoming a partnership of hearts. He had given her a key to the estate, a simple, symbolic gesture that spoke volumes. This was no longer a place of employment. It was becoming her home. The call came on a Tuesday morning, an unwelcome intrusion from a world she had gladly left behind. It was a mutual acquaintance, a woman named Fiona who moved in David's social circle, her voice a cocktail of feigned concern and gleeful gossip. "Amelia, darling, I've been hearing the most incredible rumors," Fiona gushed, "that you're shacked up with Alistair Finch. The Alistair Finch. My God, how did you manage that? David is simply beside himself." Amelia's blood ran cold. She had known, abstractly, that word would eventually get out, but hearing it stated so crudely sent a jolt of anxiety through her. "I don't know what you're talking about, Fiona." "Oh, don't be coy, everyone's talking about it. The Phantom Collector and his mysterious new protégé. David saw you. Apparently you were in a photo from some charity gala Finch dragged you to. He's telling everyone you're his glorified mechanic." The old insult, wrapped in a new package. It stung, but the pain was distant now, like a half-forgotten scar. She ended the call politely but firmly, her hand trembling slightly as she hung up. The outside world had found her. She didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, as she was returning from a walk through the estate's sprawling gardens, she saw a car she recognized parked in the gravel drive. A sleek, black Aston Martin. David's car. He was standing in the grand entrance hall, arguing with Alistair's stern-faced butler, Henderson. David looked smaller here, diminished by the scale of the house, his expensive suit and arrogant posture seeming like a cheap costume. "Amelia, there you are," he said, his voice a forced, hearty boom that echoed unpleasantly in the hallowed space. He strode towards her, a brilliant, false smile plastered on his face. "I was worried sick. I've been trying to reach you. When I heard you were out here with him," he gestured dismissively at the house around them, "I had to come and make sure you were all right." It was a masterful performance of feigned concern, but Amelia could see the truth in his eyes, a toxic cocktail of fury, disbelief, and something she had never seen there before, panic. "I'm perfectly fine, David," she said, her voice calm and even. She did not invite him in further. She stood her ground in the doorway. "You shouldn't have come." Not come? Amelia, this man is a recluse, a predator. God knows what he wants with you. I couldn't let him take advantage of you. After all we've been through, I still feel a responsibility for you. The hypocrisy was so staggering it was almost comical. He felt a responsibility now. Where was that responsibility when he was laughing in her face, when he was discarding her life's passion like trash? Just then, Alistair appeared at the top of the grand staircase. He descended slowly, his presence filling the hall, a quiet but absolute authority. He didn't look at David. His eyes were only on Amelia, a question in them. "Are you all right?" She gave him the slightest of nods. Alistair stopped on the bottom step, his gaze finally shifting to David. "You must be Mr. Carmichael," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You are trespassing. I suggest you leave." David's face flushed a blotchy red. He was not used to being dismissed. "I'm here to see my ex-wife." "Amelia is a guest in my home," Alistair stated plainly. "She is not your wife. You have no claim on her or her time. Now get out." Cornered and emasculated, David's facade of concern finally cracked, revealing the raw, desperate greed beneath. He turned back to Amelia, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "Don't be a fool, Amelia. Do you have any idea who he is, what he's worth? And that clock? Fiona told me about some ridiculous clock you bought. He wants it, doesn't he? That's what this is all about. He's manipulating you." He took a step closer, trying to loom over her as he always had. "You're in over your head. Let me help you. I can negotiate for you. We can get a piece of this, together, for old time's sake." There it was, the hidden motive. He saw her not as a person to be rescued, but as an asset he had foolishly discarded and now desperately wanted to reclaim. He thought she was still the same malleable, insecure woman he had married. He thought he could still control her. Amelia looked at him, at the desperation etched on his face, the avarice in his eyes, and she felt nothing but a profound and weary pity. The hold he had over her, the fear, the ingrained habit of deference, it was all gone. "There is no we, David," she said, and her voice did not tremble. It was the clear, steady voice of a woman who knew her own worth. "You see, that's what you've never understood. You look at that clock and you see a price tag. You look at me and you see a percentage, a way to get something for yourself. Alistair." He looks at the clock and sees its history, its genius, its soul. And when he looks at me, she paused, meeting Alistair's gaze on the stairs. He sees the same things. She turned back to David, her expression hardening. "You laughed at my empty hands, and you were right. They were empty of your diamonds, your money, your influence, but they were never worthless. You just didn't have the eyes to see what they held." She took a step back, aligning herself with Alistair. "Now, please leave my home." The words, "my home," hung in the air, a final, definitive statement. It was a declaration of independence, of a life rebuilt, of a future he had no part in. David stared at her, his mouth slightly agape, the realization finally dawning on him. He had lost. Not just a potential score, but something far more fundamental. He had completely and irrevocably misjudged the woman he had spent a decade trying to shape into his own image. He had laughed at a reflection, while the real person had quietly walked away, gathering her strength, waiting for her moment. Without another word, he turned and stalked out of the hall, the sound of the heavy oak door slamming shut, echoing like a final, pathetic tantrum. In the silence that followed, Alistair walked down the final step and came to stand beside Amelia. He didn't speak, but gently he took her hand. It wasn't empty. It was home. In the weeks that followed David's humiliating retreat, a profound peace settled over the estate. It was as if his departure had exorcised the last ghost of Amelia's past, clearing the air for good. The confrontation had been a final, clarifying test, not of her love for Alistair, but of her love for herself. She had faced the architect of her deepest insecurities and had not crumbled. She had stood tall, spoken her truth, and claimed her new life. The Dubois clock now sat in its place of honor in the library, its twin hands marking the passage of a new and better time. It was a masterpiece, a testament to genius, but for Amelia, it was also a symbol of how something or someone could be discarded as worthless junk, only to be rediscovered and recognized for its true, incalculable value. Her relationship with Alistair deepened, evolving from the quiet respect of colleagues to the easy intimacy of partners. They spent their days in companionable silence in the library, she poring over antique horological texts, rediscovering the academic passion David had almost extinguished. He, working on the catalogue of his collection, a project he had put off for years. In the evenings they would walk the grounds, their conversations meandering from the philosophy of time to the simple beauty of a sunset. He showed her the hidden parts of his life, the vulnerabilities beneath the billionaire's armor. He spoke of a lonely childhood, of the immense pressure of his family name, of a life spent in pursuit of objects because he had found genuine human connection so elusive. In Amelia, he had found someone who was not interested in his fortune or his name, but in the intricate, complex movement of his own heart. One crisp autumn evening, Alistair led her not to the library or the map room, but up a winding stone staircase to a part of the house she had never seen, an observatory. A massive antique brass telescope pointed out from a domed copper roof, aimed at the star-dusted sky. Dubois wasn't just a clockmaker, Alistair said, his voice a low murmur in the dark room. He was an astronomer. He believed that to understand time, you had to understand the universe, that the precise, predictable dance of the planets was the ultimate clockwork. He guided her to the eyepiece of the telescope. "Look," he whispered. Amelia leaned forward and gasped. Floating in the velvet blackness was Saturn, its magnificent rings sharp and clear, a breathtaking celestial jewel. She felt a sense of profound wonder, of being connected to something vast, ancient, and beautiful. "For years," Alistair said, his hand gently resting on her back, "I felt like I was living on a different plane from everyone else, observing the world from a distance, but never truly a part of it. A collector, not a participant. You changed that, Amelia. You brought me back to Earth. You showed me that the most beautiful, intricate mechanism in the universe is the connection between two people." He turned her to face him. The only light in the room was the faint, silvery glow of the stars filtering through the open dome. His face was serious, his blue eyes full of a depth of emotion she had come to know and cherish. "I didn't just want to complete my ancestors' collection," he said softly. "I want to start my own. A legacy not of objects, but of life, of partnership, of love." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside was not a large, flashy diamond, but a simple, elegant, vintage ring. An Art Deco piece, with a sapphire the color of a twilight sky, flanked by two small, perfectly cut diamonds. It was a piece she recognized from a catalogue made by a master jeweler known for his understated, intellectual designs. It was a ring he had chosen for her tastes, for who she was. "Amelia Hayes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the missing piece in my life's design, the one I didn't even know I was searching for. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Amelia's eyes, not tears of sadness or relief, but of a joy so profound it was almost overwhelming. She thought of the woman who had sat in that restaurant, humiliated and broken. She thought of David's cruel laughter, his pronouncement of her worthlessness. He had been so spectacularly, cosmically wrong. Her life hadn't been a downgrade. It had been a necessary stripping away of everything that was false, everything that was not hers, to reveal the unshakable core beneath. She had not been empty-handed. She had been holding on to herself, waiting for the right time. "Yes," she whispered, her voice full of certainty. "Yes, Alistair, I will." Their wedding was not a grand society affair. It was a small, private ceremony held in the estate's ancient, sun-dappled orangery, attended by only a handful of close friends. Amelia wore a simple, elegant ivory dress, and she walked down the aisle not as a billionaire's bride, but as Alistair Finch's partner, his equal, his love. Later, as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the Berkshire Hills, they stood together in the library, the Dubois clock ticking softly on its pedestal. Alistair wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder, as they watched the twin hands complete their endless, perfect revolution. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's a reminder," he replied, his lips brushing her temple, "that time can heal all wounds, and that sometimes you have to be completely broken down before you can be restored to your true, magnificent self." Amelia leaned back against him, her heart full. He was right. She had been through the fire of betrayal and the ice of loneliness, but she had emerged not broken, but stronger, more authentic, and more valuable than ever before. She was not just a billionaire's bride. She was the architect of her own redemption, the master of her own time. And her future, stretching out before her like the star-filled sky in the observatory, was finally, truly hers. And that's how a single moment of cruel laughter became the catalyst for an incredible new life. Amelia's story is a powerful reminder that our true value is never determined by someone else's opinion or by what we have in our hands. It's measured by the knowledge in our minds, the passion in our hearts, and the resilience of our spirit. David thought he had taken everything, but he missed the one thing that truly mattered. What did you think of Amelia's journey from heartbreak to happiness? Can you relate to that feeling of being underestimated? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more emotional and empowering stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.